top 10 scary stories that are real. Coming in number 10, we have the woman in the cupboard. Now this one is really strange, really odd. In 2000, a man in Japan became suspicious when food started disappearing from his apartment. So the man decided to set up cameras all around the place in the hope of catching whoever was doing this. When he got home the next day, he looked at the camera footage and he was very creeped out to see a woman walking around his house. He thought she was a burglar and she'd just come to steal some stuff when he was out, and so he rang the police. But when officers searched the place, they found a 58-year-old woman hiding in the top of a cupboard designed to store bedding and mattresses. What? This was just enough room for her to lie down, and she had been living in the cupboard the whole time, lying there perfectly still in the dark, just meters away from him, waiting for him to leave so she could use the house as if it were her own. Now I don't know about you guys, but I think I'm going to do a quick check of every single cupboard in my house when I get home, and by quick I mean 10 hours. Next up at number 9 now, we have Armin Meiwes. This story is not really for those with a delicate stomach, so look away if that's you. In the early 2000s, Armin visited a little known website called the Cannibal Cafe. He posted a list looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. His words, not mine. Yeah, normally young adults want good jobs, they want to travel, maybe find a partner and be slaughtered and then consumed, apparently. Amazingly, a few people actually replied and then backed out, presumably when they realized it was insane. But one man, Bernard Brandes, actually went to Armin's house. They then made a video of Armin cutting off his penis. He then tried to cook it and eat it, but it got burnt apparently, so he fed it to his dog. This happened. As Brandes bled to death in the bathtub, Armin gave him alcohol and 20 sleeping pills and then read a Star Trek book for 3 hours. He then kissed him and then killed him and then froze the flesh for 10 months while he lived off it and ground the bones into flour. Amazingly, he was only caught when he posted online the following year looking for his next meal and victim and bragged about what had happened before. He is now serving life in prison. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Silent Twins. Jennifer and June, the Gibbons twins from the UK, were known as the Silent Twins because they only ever talked to each other. Their sisterly love, and then there was this. The girls were absolutely obsessed with each other and gradually began to shun the community around them, who were not very welcoming to the girls. Eventually, they developed their own language and started communicating and committing crimes together, such as arson. This led them to be committed to a mental health institution for 14 years. June later said the whole thing went too far, and although we longed to be normal, we couldn't break out. It was too late, we were twins, but our personalities clashed. She wrote in her diary that her sister was a dark shadow, robbing her of sunlight. Now psychologists deemed them deeply disturbed, and the girls felt so trapped, they said the only way that one of them could lead a normal life was if the other one died and freed them. The day after they were released from the institution, Jennifer died from a rare heart inflammation. June began to speak to others and went on to live a normal life for the first time. She wrote the epitaph on her sister's gravestone that read, "We once were two, we two made one. We no more two, through life be one. Rest in peace." Creepy. Coming in at number 7, I'm Watching You. In 2015, a woman called Chelsea Clark from Toronto was watching movies in bed with her boyfriend. The next day, after work, she logged into her Facebook account and saw that she had a message from someone she didn't know. Now, Chelsea thought this was quite strange because her settings didn't allow messages from strangers. The message was titled, "Really Cute Couple." Chelsea opened it to find a guy with his profile picture as the Joker had sent pictures of her and her boyfriend in bed the night before to her. The account was deleted soon after, and police investigations have made no leads at the moment. So, next time you're watching something on your laptop, guys, maybe your tablet or your phone at night, someone could be watching right back at you. Next up at number 6, the Cemetery Clown. In 2015, Julie Graham and her husband were driving past Rose Hill Cemetery at night when they spotted a figure climbing over the cemetery gate. They captured this picture, but it wasn't until they looped back around that they realized it was a clown. They tried to get a bit closer for a better look, and that's when they saw him standing alone in the middle of the gravestones, slowly waving at them. And yes, that is the creepiest looking wave of all time. He didn't seem scared or bothered by them at all, but before the couple could even understand what was going on, the clown slowly turned around and walked into the darkness of the cemetery. Now, when police investigated all of this the next day, they found no signs of vandalism or disturbance in the graveyard, leading many people to wonder what the cemetery clown was doing that night and if he's going to be seen again. Coming at number 5 now, we have the children. In the 90s, respected journalist Brian Bethel shared a story that changed his and many others' opinions on the paranormal. One evening, Brian said he was parked outside of a local movie theater and filling out a check for someone. Then he looked up to see 2 boys standing next to the car in the darkness, no more than 10 or 12 years old. Now, before they even spoke, Brian said he was gripped with fear. He couldn't explain why, and that it was just incomprehensible and soul-racking. Only one of the boys spoke, and they said they wanted to see a movie, but they had left their money at home and asked if Brian could give them a ride back to get their money. Now, Brian avoided looking at them because of the fear and instead looked up to see that the last show had already started and there was no way they'd make it back in time. The boy said it wouldn't take long. He said they were just 2 little kids. He said they didn't have a gun or anything. Now, that last sentence scared Brian the most, and as the feeling of terror consumed him, he realized his hand was already moving to unlock the door. That's when he looked up to see their eyes. They were deep, coal black. Brian quickly made his excuses, but as he tried to drive away, the kid started banging on the window and said,
"We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in."
Okay, at number 4, we have Robert the doll. Now, this doll was given to a boy, Eugene Otto, in 1904 by a Jamaican woman who worked with the family, who was supposedly a practicer of black magic and voodoo. She had supposedly cursed the doll because she was unhappy with how the family had treated her, and they soon reported hearing conversations between Eugene and Robert the doll. At night, his parents would hear Eugene scream, and when they ran into the bedroom, they would find the furniture around Robert had been thrown around. When the family left to go on trips, the neighbors reported seeing Robert move from window to window of the house, and they would sometimes hear the doll let out a terrifying cackle. Over time, the house was sold on to a new family, but the doll remained there. The new owner, a 10-year-old girl, also screamed in the night and claimed that Robert would move, and that one time he even tried to attack her. These days, he sits in the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida and was the inspiration for the horror movie Child's Play. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Murder Castle. In 1886, pharmacist H.H. Holmes bought a number of properties in Chicago that left him owning an entire city block. He began renovating them into a hotel. He would hire some workers for one part and others for a different area, so nobody really knew the full extent of the hotel's layout. It was finished just in time for the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, where people from all over the world descended on the city. But this wasn't a normal hotel. Almost every part of it was some sort of torture chamber. For most of that year, he trapped unsuspecting guests in their rooms to kill them. There were gas chambers and also rooms to suffocate people or starve them to death, as well as a hanging room. I'm not even sure what a hanging room means, but sounds pretty nasty. The whole building was designed to confuse the victims and give them a false sense of hope. There were staircases that led to absolutely nowhere and doors that were totally bricked off. Once they were dead, Holmes disposed of the bodies through a specially designed chute to dump them into the basement and then incinerate them in huge furnaces. He is known as America's first serial killer. Moving on to number 2, we have the real Leatherface. This is the story that inspired the movies Psycho, Silence of the Lambs. So, what real life story could produce such horror? It's the story of Ed Gein. This man had a disturbed obsession with his own mother, who had raised him during the earlier 20th century, with strict religious teachings about the sins of lust and desire. Now, after she died in 1945, Ed began to spiral into the life of a serial killer. At first, he would dig up bodies of recently buried females and cut off their body parts to keep as trophies before placing them back in the graves. Then he stepped up and began a killing spree before police finally caught him. When they discovered the dismembered body of a woman in his farmhouse shed, investigators were also horrified by what else they found. A freshly cooked human heart was on the stove, ready to be eaten. He'd made drinking bowls out of their skulls, and the creepiest thing, I think, was what he had done with his victim's skin. He used them to make furniture, face masks, and women's clothes out of women's skin. I know the horror movie classics were inspired by this, but yeah, they can't really touch on how creepy this really was. And finally at number 1, we have the death of Elisa Lam. Elisa was a 21-year-old Canadian woman who was visiting LA in 2013. She stayed at the Cecil Hotel in downtown LA and had been calling her parents every single day on her visit, but then on January 31st the calls suddenly stopped and her worried parents reported her missing to the police. She seemed to have just vanished out of nowhere. Then on February 14th, the police released this video of her behaving very erratically in the hotel elevator. She seemed to exit and then re-enter, and then started making some sort of gesture to something in the hallway outside. At one point, she simply crouches as if to hide from whatever is out there. Eventually, guests of the hotel started complaining about the water, saying it was black, foul tasting, and had low pressure. Now, when staff went to investigate the water tank on the roof of the hotel, they found Elisa Lam's decomposing body. That's why the water was black. Oh god. The police don't know how she got onto the roof, which was locked and alarmed, or how she got into the tank and then replaced the lid from the inside, or what was going on in that elevator. Something really creepy. Some people think that this all points to a murder, others say it was supernatural in nature, that Elisa was actually possessed. Millions of people have now watched the infamous elevator video, and many people say something about it is very, very disturbing. Will it ever be solved? Well guys, those are our 10 stories with that lethal combination of being scary and real, but which one was your favourite? Have I missed any good ones out that you guys know about? Maybe we should put them into a part 2. Starting off at number 10, we have the killer body fumes. In 1994, Gloria Ramirez was rushed to hospital with breathing problems and ended up dying from heart and kidney failure. While they were trying to save her, the ER staff inserted an IV drip into her and drew some blood. They said it smelt like ammonia, and some people reported her skin being covered in a strange oily layer. The nurse then noticed strange particles floating in the blood. Soon, she fainted. Then the doctor left the room, sat down, and also fainted. Next, a respiratory therapist in the room fainted. People started dropping like flies. When they woke up, they couldn't stop shaking and their skin felt like it was on fire. The ones who were closest to Gloria Ramirez ended up being hospitalized for days, but out of the 37 emergency room staff members, 23 of them experienced some of these strange symptoms. Scientists have struggled to put forward a theory as to why Gloria Ramirez's body was just so toxic and how fumes from her blood were just so dangerous. Coming in at number 9 now, we have The Watcher. In 2014, a family in Westfield, New Jersey were forced to flee their brand new $1.3 million home after receiving letters from someone who called themselves The Watcher. Now, The Watcher had told the new family that the home had been in his family for decades and that they were put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. Now, if that doesn't sound creepy enough, wait till you hear this. The Watcher then asked if the family's children had found what's in the walls yet, and also said, "I am pleased to know your names now and the names of the young blood you have brought to me." Quite rightly, the family left soon after that, and the police never found out who the Watcher really was. No new letters have been sent, and it's thought the Watcher is just waiting to watch the new arrivals. Next up at number 8 now, we have Heaven's Gate. In 1974, a group called Heaven's Gate formed in the United States. They believed the Earth was about to be recycled. All life would apparently be wiped out, and the only way for them to be saved was to evacuate the planet and get onto a spacecraft that was traveling behind an approaching comet. How? by committing mass suicide. This UFO would then apparently take their souls to a level of existence above human. On March 26, 1997, their bodies were found at a rented California ranch. 38 members had killed themselves by taking a lethal cocktail. Police found all of them lying neatly in their own bunk beds. Their faces were covered with a square purple cloth. All of them had black sweatpants and joggers on, brand new Nike shoes and armband patches that said Heaven's Gate Away Team. This was not a joke. Tapes that they had recorded before the mass suicide can be found on YouTube right now. Coming in at number 7, we have Facebook from Beyond the Grave. In 2014, Reddit user Nate SW shared a very chilling story. On the 7th of August 2012, his girlfriend Emily was killed in a car crash. They had been dating for 5 years. 13 months passed with Nate trying to move on from that, and then on September 4th, 2013, he got a Facebook message from her. At first, Nathan presumed it was from Emily's mother, who he had given the Facebook password to. A few more months passed, and then the messages continued again, making references to some of their past conversations. Then he started getting notifications from her where she would tag herself in his pictures in empty spaces where she should have been. No matter how many times he changed the password, the messages just kept coming. Eventually, she started to say she was cold, really cold. She was freezing and didn't know what was happening to her. To this day, Nathan still doesn't know if this was some sort of sick joke or a chilling message from beyond the grave. In at number 6 now, we have Joseph Metheny. Before our story even begins, Joseph had already killed 10 people in a number of different grisly ways. The victims were usually crack cocaine addicts or prostitutes that he would hack to death with an axe under a bridge. One witness, who was just fishing nearby, got beaten to death with a steel pipe simply for just seeing a murder take place. Joseph was still not caught, and so he opened his own burger stand. Like you do. Now, whenever he killed a new prostitute, he would use the meat in his burgers that he would sell to people. When he was eventually caught and arrested, Metheny told police, "I would also sell real roast beef and pork sandwiches. They were very good. The human body taste was very similar to pork. If you mix it together, no one can tell the difference." Next up at number 5 now, we have the cell phone stalker. In 2007, a family in Washington state started getting unwelcome calls on their phones. Throughout the night, the calls threatened to kill their children, the grandparents, and the pets, and creepily, they would also get voicemails of their own private conversations, and even one where they were talking to a police detective about this whole thing. Disturbingly, when the phone call's origins were traced, they seemed to come from the family's own phones, even when they were switched off. Their phone company said this should not be possible. At one point, even the neighbor got a call. She was apparently slicing limes in her kitchen when the stalker called and said he preferred lemons. No matter how many times they changed their phones, the calls just kept coming. The stalker was never caught, and in the end, the family said if they go a day without a call, that's a good day. Okay, moving on to the number 4 spot now, we have the girl in the box. In 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was kidnapped while hitchhiking from her home in Oregon. Her captors, Cameron and Janice Hooker, took her to the Californian hills and kept her in a sort of coffin-like box. Colleen would often spend 23 hours in this box at a time, only being allowed out to be beaten, raped, and tortured. This went on for 7 years, from 1977 until 1984. At that point, Janice Hooker, one of the captors, finally went to the police and told them everything. Colleen was rescued, reunited with her family, and underwent a lot of therapy to try and live a normal life again. I'm amazed that anyone could do that after spending 7 years locked in a coffin for sometimes 23 hours a day. Next up at number 3, we have the Hinterkaifeck murder. In 1922, an entire family living at the Hinterkaifeck farm in Germany were killed by wounds from a pickaxe. The parents, widows widowed daughter, her children, and even the housekeeper were all found dead. 4 of them were in the barn and 2 of them were in their beds. Here's the really creepy thing. The murderer apparently continued to live at the farm with the family's dead bodies there for some time afterwards. Police knew this because when they arrived, the animals were still being fed. Neighbors apparently saw smoke coming from the chimney, and also the dog was tied up outside the barn. It gets even creepier. Before their murders, the family had reported hearing footsteps in the attic, seeing footprints in the snow that led from the woods to the house but not back the other way, and they also saw claw marks on the door of the tool shed where they kept the pickaxe that was used to kill them. The crime was never solved. Coming in at number 2 now, we have The Waking Dead. This story comes from Honduras, where a girl called Nacy Perez went into a panic attack after hearing gunshots. When she started foaming at the mouth, a priest was called to exorcise her of an evil spirit. Soon though, she was pronounced dead in hospital and buried in her wedding dress at the cemetery. A day after the funeral, her husband was visiting her grave when he heard banging and screaming coming from inside the concrete tomb. A graveyard worker confirmed hearing the exact same thing. The family arrived, smashed open the tomb and took her to hospital. Her cousin said she put her hand on her body and she was still warm. She had scratches on her forehead and bruises on her fingers. It looked like she had tried desperately to get out of the casket and had hurt herself. She was pronounced dead again at the hospital and buried for a second time. Some people say she didn't actually die the first time and instead might have woken up inside the coffin and died from lack of oxygen. And finally now, at number 1, we have Rodney Alcala. This man is a convicted rapist and serial killer who has been sentenced to death for the murder of 5 women between 1978 and 1979. The scary thing is, it's thought he could have killed as many as 50. Right in the middle of this killing spree, Rodney Alcala was accepted as a contestant on the dating game TV show where men compete for a date with a bachelorette. In the TV footage, it's incredibly disturbing to see this man flirt with women, as he had just killed 2 women recently.
I'm called the banana and I look really good.
Not long after, Rodney Alcala would go on to kill 2 more women. Horrifyingly, he actually beat the other contestants. The only sliver of light in this dark story is the fact that the woman that he won the date with eventually refused to go on the date with him because she found him creepy. I hope someone studied her superhuman senses because that woman was on the ball. Well guys, what do you think of all of those? Are you creeped out? Do you want a part 3 perhaps? What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you in your life? Like our number 10 from user Mom Says I'm Pretty. They said that when they were a kid, they were sleeping with their mom one night in her bed when they woke up in the middle of the night to see their cat sitting in the bedroom doorway. He walked towards them and meowed. They turned to face their mother and tried to wake her up. It took a few seconds, but when she finally did, they looked back and there, across the hallway in their own bedroom door, they saw a man walking slowly out of the room. They were on the first floor, so their mother threw them out of the window where they ran to a neighbor and called 911. The house was totally locked when they went to sleep, and police said they think the man had been hiding in the house until nighttime. Alright, coming in at number 9 now. Reddit user SkyShadow42 told a story about how his wife's grandmother was walking back from the library one day where she volunteered at. About halfway along the wooded walk, she noticed someone behind her. Soon, the man was right up close to her. He started matching her pace. She started to panic, but she knew she was almost home. She was just 100 yards away and she could feel his breath on the back of her neck when suddenly it happens. He puts his hand on her shoulder and says in a sinister voice, "Okay, don't turn around and hand over your purse or I'll cut ya." Doesn't sound the same coming from me. She stops, she steps forward, she turns around and shoots him in the neck with a gun that she's always kept in her purse. This was Texas. The man died in a hospital prison 5 years later and the family was left with a pretty scary story to tell everyone. Next up at number 8, Reddit user Lenny AK told the story of being a little kid living in Eastern Europe. One day, when he and his cousin were about 8 or 9 years old, they were walking through the woods. Suddenly, in the bushes, they saw a man just standing there. He had his back towards them and was wearing nothing but underwear, dress shoes and a watch. They froze and stared at him. He must have heard them because he began to slowly turn around to reveal a terrifyingly creepy smile on his face. He then began to make a beckoning motion with his finger. They both ran away as fast as they could, and they said they've never ran faster since. Moving on to number 7. Reddit user Faux Fox told the story of their family vacation years ago to Missouri. They arrived at the house at 1 a.m. and were all hungry from their long drive. His father, mother, and younger sisters wanted to see if a nearby McDonald's was open. He was so tired that he said he would stay back at the house. The mother said that one of the sisters would be staying with him too. As he fell asleep watching TV in the living room, he heard the pitter-patter of footsteps along the hallway behind him and assumed it was his sister. He got a call from his mother to ask what he wants to eat, and he could hear both of his sisters in the background. She confirmed that they had both ended up going with them, and then suddenly he heard a giggle come from somewhere behind him. He stood up to look around but saw nothing and said he stood in the corner of the room until everyone got back. At the number 6 spot, Reddit user Grumpy Dietitian told the story of her friend who was a medical student. She got back to her apartment at 1 p.m. one Sunday and had a lot of work to catch up on. She sat at the kitchen table for about 5 or 6 hours solid, just doing work. Suddenly, she looks up across the hallway to her bedroom to see a man casually walking out of the room. There were no other entrances there. She was sat by the front door. He had been there the whole time that she had. He froze in the doorway to her kitchen. She also froze. They stared at each other. Then her phone rang, which startled them both. She got up to answer it, he ran out of the door. Apparently, she moved to a new apartment soon after and got a huge dog. Next up at number 5, Reddit user NappyBoy28 was renting a place in Bath in the UK one spring. While in bed one night, he heard the outside gate open and close quietly, putting him on alert. He heard the footsteps of a person walking on gravel to their front door. The motion sensor light suddenly flickered on. A shadow darted against the wall outside of their room. He ran to the kitchen, grabbed a massive knife and stood by their door waiting to pounce, but there was only silence. Eventually he heard the sound of someone running away and the gate slamming shut behind them. They didn't know if it was a robber, an attacker, or some other sinister figure, but the memory still gives them goosebumps to this day. At number 4 now, one Reddit user told the story of moving to a new area when she was 10 years old and making friends with a 12-year-old girl. One night her friend Rob was hanging out with the girl and her younger brother. They were home alone. The girl's mother had been helping a woman at work whose sister had recently been released from a mental institution. The kids got a knock at the door that night and they thought it was the mom. Unfortunately, it was actually the woman from the mental institution. She had somehow pieced together where the mother and her family lived. Rob managed to get away, but the girl wasn't so lucky. Police arrived at the house to find the girl had been decapitated and left in the bath. Her head had been hidden. The officer described it as a sight that will stick with them for the rest of their lives. That got dark very quickly. Alright, next up at number 3. Jackie O-Face told the story of how they were almost snatched as a kid. One day he was out playing with his 2 younger siblings in summer when a man pulled up alongside them in a truck. He called them over and asked for his name. He asked if they're having a good summer. He says he needs help to find his lost puppy. He says he will show him a photo of the puppy if he comes a little bit closer. The boy then called out to his brother Dan, who was nearby, saying, "Dan, come help us find a puppy." Suddenly, the man looked terrified and drove away as fast as he could. The family thinks that the man thought he was shouting Dad and not Dan. That one simple name mistake might have been the reason he wasn't abducted. Alright, at number 2 now we have Gerbils Didn't Do That, who said that when they lived in an apartment by themselves, they would always lock the deadbolt and leave the handle lock unlocked. One day, they came home and found that it was switched over. Now she thought it was just her mistake at first, but it kept happening every single day. The locks were always the wrong way around. One day it happened, and she thought that was really strange. As usual, she went to the fridge to get something to eat, and inside the fridge she found a 100-year-old book, just like the ones she actually collected as a hobby, but this one wasn't hers. She called her landlady to find out what was going on. The landlady said she didn't touch the locks or put the book in the fridge, but was very freaked out because the last person to live there was a very creepy guy with mental health issues and drug problems. She got the locks changed forever later that that day. And finally now at number 1, we have user CDC, who told the story of always having a very irrational fear as a child that if they returned home at night, they had to walk straight into the house without looking back, because if they did, someone would be following them. One night they went to go and grab their school bag from the car, and on their way back, with their anxiety levels reaching their absolute peak, they thought, "This is stupid. What am I doing?" So they looked back. He saw what appeared to be someone crouching down beside his mum's car, peeking their head around the side. A woman in her mid to late 30s. She was just staring at them, wide-eyed, with a big smile on her face. They made eye contact, and then he ran inside. Another Reddit user said she was smiling because finally, after years of watching him, he had finally caught her. Creepy. That is the only word I have for that one. Alright, you little creeps, do you want a part 4 of this? I kinda do. I found a couple of other stories that might actually be a little bit too dark for this video, so I'm gonna see how you guys like this one, and then maybe we'll get even darker in the next part. Don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on all our future videos. I'm Danny Burke, and I'll see you all in the next one.